Just 1 second before you clicked on this video, the entire world might have been cheering for the arrival of 2026, with social media feeds full of New Year's wishes and beautiful expectations for the year ahead. But have you ever considered a cruel paradox when the vast majority of people are immersed in a kind of false hope? The true predators are often utilizing that hope to execute their final, bloody harvest. At this very moment, I have something in my hand. It comes from the Morgan Stanley commodities trading desk. This memo drifted like a ghost through those cold skyscrapers of Manhattan just 72 hours ago. It wasn't sent to you, nor even to ordinary wealth management clients. It was sent to that tiny, most cold-blooded circle of global institutional titans. It contains only 3 words capable of flash: freezing global financial markets, exit all positions. This is a negotiation, nor is it some gentle risk warning. This is a forced evacuation order, regardless of the cost. When a top-tier bank managing $2.3 trillion in assets abandons all polite industry jargon and chooses language that smells of gunpowder, and sets a deadline of the end of the month, it means the red lights in those risk models we cannot see have already burned through the circuit boards. The elephants of Wall Street have foreseen the tsunami, and they are leading the charge toward the only exit. And you, at this moment, if you don't understand the logic behind this, you are the one who will be left on the sinking ship to foot the bill. This memo is short and sharp, consisting of only 3 paragraphs. On Wall Street, truly lethal information never requires flowery prose. At a table full of billionaires, no one has the patience for nonsense. They only want the extreme truth. Let us look at the first paragraph. The document starts by mentioning a term: structural changes. If you are someone who has been immersed in the financial world for years, hearing this term makes your skin crawl. To put it in plain English, the rules of the game are broken. The underlying mathematical models are trash. The basic assumptions that originally supported the silver market, such as the delicate balance between physical supply and paper pricing, have shattered like glass beyond repair. It's like a bridge you drive across every day, only for the engineers to suddenly realize the foundation has completely eroded and can no longer carry any weight. At that point, you don't suggest the driver slow down, you close the bridge immediately, and everyone must turn around on the spot. Not a single second can be wasted. Morgan Stanley is hinting that due to extreme volatility in the silver derivatives market, the leverage game played for decades has reached its physical limit. The second paragraph contains an even more ruthless directive: clients should prioritize orderly liquidation over price optimization. Do you hear the killing intent behind that? Morgan Stanley is telling those top-tier titans, don't worry about losing money, and don't worry about how bad the selling price is. Even if you have to cut the meat at the worst possible point, you must exit by the end of the month. Why? Because price optimization is a game played during times of peace. When you are in a 100-story building already on fire, you absolutely will not slow your run toward the safety exit just because you want to protect your expensive leather shoes. Morgan Stanley has clearly detected a trigger point with a specific timeline. The end of the month deadline was not chosen at random. It is a mathematically derived threshold for systemic collapse. The final paragraph is the nuclear warhead of this letter. Morgan Stanley will simultaneously reduce its proprietary risk exposure to 0 and will not accept new silver-related business until further notice. This completely tears away the last shred of decorum. A bank that lives on trading fees and interest is saying it will no longer accept new business and even wants to clear its own books to the last cent. When a bank rejects profit and revenue, it means the risk they see is existential. This means that carrying even a single ounce of silver risk poses a consequence that far outweighs any potential windfall. You might be curious, why would a giant like Morgan Stanley issue such a memo, Arn? Are they afraid of triggering a market stampede that would trap even themselves? The answer is extremely cold-blooded. They issued this document essentially for exemption of liability. On Wall Street, if you foresee a disaster and dawn, tell your clients you will be sued into bankruptcy by those well-connected institutional clients until you lose your shirt. But if you formally issue an evacuation order and the client insists on staying, that is their own greed and stupidity. Every word of this document has been vetted through layers of compliance, legal, and risk departments. They must have privately run countless stress tests and concluded that the reputational loss of being wrong is far smaller than the legal compensation required if their clients are wiped out. When they are willing to risk looking panicked by issuing this, it means the disaster probability in their models is no longer a possibility, but an inevitability. The Morgan Stanley trading desk holds bloody data that retail investors can never touch. What they see is not delayed television news, but real, time order flows, and the actual lifeblood of the global physical market. You must realize that in those offices with lights burning late into the night, risk management officers aren't concerned with today. Closing price, they are watching to see if the interbank counterparties have already snapped. They smell that burning scent from 2008 before Lehman Brothers collapsed. This evacuation is actually a form of internal clearance within Wall Street. Now, let us push open those heavy steel doors and look at the first core of this crisis, the extreme hemorrhage of COMEX vaults. Currently, Colorado MEX, New York Mercantile Exchange, registered silver inventory, that is, those heavy bars that can be taken out for delivery at any time, has dropped below 32 million ounces. You might think this is still a large number, but if you look at it on a historical timeline, this is a 10-year low. The truly terrifying part is the speed of the drain. 6 weeks ago, this number was still 41 million ounces. This means that in just a month and a half, an average of 1.5 million ounces evaporated every week. But in the 2 weeks just past, the drain has shown a weird exponential acceleration. If you could hack into hidden internal logistics data, you would find that certain big buyers are bypassing all public quotes and performing surgical extractions directly from the vaults. At this point, the bulls will jump out to comfort you. Don't worry, isn't there still the so-called eligible inventory? There are over 200 million ounces there. That statement is faker than a fairy tale. You have to understand that eligible inventory is essentially privately held. With physical silver premiums skyrocketing today, do you think the owners of those bars would be foolish enough to bring out the physical metal to fill the holes of paper contracts? In Asia and Europe, the buying price for physical silver is already much higher than the paper price. Since they can ship it overseas for a high price, who would be willing to sell to the exchange at COMEX's artificial price of $71? Those metals are now like treasures frozen under a glacier. Holders will only grip them tighter. The depletion of inventory is in fact a collective vote by the physical market against the paper rules. If you think the depletion of inventory is just a logistics problem, you are too naive. It leads directly to the second crisis, the total collapse of mathematical logic. The futures market used to be, in essence, an elegant betting game. Out of 100 contracts, usually fewer than 5 people actually wanted to take away the heavy silver bricks. The other 95 just wanted to make some pocket change from the price movements. This balance of 50-fold or even 100-fold leverage is the cornerstone of the entire modern financial system. But now, this ratio is out of control. In the most recent delivery month, the proportion of open interest demanding physical delivery has surged, and the preliminary data for the next delivery month is even more suffocating. As much as 12 to 15% of positions may demand delivery. Let us do a very simple piece of arithmetic. Currently, the open interest for COMEX silver futures is about 160,000 contracts. Each contract represents 5,000 ounces. In other words, there are 800 million ounces of claims hanging on paper. If 15% demand delivery, that is 120 million ounces of physical demand. However, there are only 32 million ounces in the vault. This logic is terrifying. It is equivalent to selling 100 movie tickets for a theater that only has 4 seats. The mathematical model has collapsed. Once delivery day arrives and that demand for 120 million ounces rushes toward the vault, while the vault can even provide a fraction of it, the exchange can only do one thing: declare default, declare force majeure, and then forcibly settle positions using devaluing cash. At that moment, that price on the paper will lose all meaning, because no one will believe that piece of paper can be exchanged for real assets. And what keeps Morgan Stanley's risk managers up at night is the black hole no one wants to talk about in public: counterparty risk. Outside the exchanges, there is an even larger, darker market called the counter OTC derivatives market. There, swap agreements and forward contracts signed between banks represent a notional exposure of billions of ounces. These contracts are like invisible threads tying all global banks together through the interbank lending market. Morgan Stanley has already smelled that ominous smoke. They have found that several major big short players are facing extreme liquidity squeezes. They are searching everywhere for collateral to maintain those massive short positions. When you see abnormal fluctuations in overnight repo rates late at night, that is those big players struggling. Once one of them fails to fulfill their obligations, once one swap agreement becomes a scrap of paper, the contagion will instantly ignite the entire field. This is a chain reaction brought about by the collapse of confidence. Morgan Stanley does not want to be in the room when that financial tsunami arrives, so they choose to exit before the explosion, before everyone. S actions become distorted, clearing the books and walking away. These three crises, inventory depletion, the delivery squeeze, and counterparty default, have now twisted into a self-reinforcing doom loop. Declining inventory triggers panic, panic leads to more people wanting to lock it in, resulting in more physical delivery requests. Shorts who have no metal, in order to avoid default, are forced to rush into the market to try and drive the price up to grab physical metal to cover. But this only empties the vaults faster. Meanwhile, physical premiums explode. Some markets are already seeing premiums of $30, which sends a clear signal to the world. The price on the screen is a lie. This, in turn, triggers even crazier bank runs on the metal. Morgan Stanley is not crying wolf. This bank has a very deep, one might even say bloody, institutional memory. They have experienced too many similar moments of liquidation. They remember the spring of March 1980, when the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market and the price soared from $6 to $50. Back then, the big short selling banks were as panicked as they are now. But what happened? The exchange suddenly changed the rules, only allowing for closing positions and not for buying. Consequently, the bulls were instantly suffocated and the price collapsed. That was rule-based murder by power against capital. They remember 2008. At that time, the interbank lending market was also gradually seizing up. Those banks that thought everything was fine and continued to maintain their risk exposure either went bankrupt or were forced to kneel before the government for a bailout. Morgan Stanley itself only survived that storm through an emergency transformation and capital injection. This experience of escaping death has given them a physiological alertness to risk. A more recent example is the 2022 London Metal Exchange, LME nickel short squeeze. At that time, a Chinese company was pushed to a dead end, and the price doubled instantly. What did the exchange do? It shut down trading directly and even voided orders that had already been executed. Those investors who went long, even if they had predicted the direction correctly, not only failed to get their profits, but also had to face the violent intervention of the rules. Morgan Stanley knows that when systemic pressure reaches its limit, the authorities will surely sacrifice a few to protect the larger system, and they do not want to be the sacrificial pawn. They choose to leave now because they know that the second the rules change, no matter how fast you run, you cannot outrun the hand that modifies the code. So, after all this, the key question is not whether Morgan Stanley is being alarmist, but what do you plan to do? You must recognize one reality. The window for survival, given by this memo, is less than 3 to 4 weeks. After the end of the month, everything will enter that dark zone where there is no protection from established rules. In the coming period, you will see silver prices exhibit extremely weird, even completely irrational, fluctuations. You will see prices fluctuate by $10 in a single day. Why? Because when a giant of Morgan Stanley S level closes positions, buying back shorts will drive up the price, and selling longs will crash the price. This is a tsunami caused by a giant ship turning around. If what you hold is paper silver, contracts, or ETFs, you must realize that you only have this narrow escape window before the end of the month. Because after that, paper assets and physical assets will experience a total decoupling. Paper silver might become a meaningless cash compensation plan due to exchange defaults, while physical silver, the metal you can hold in your hand, will become the only asset in this chaotic world with ultimate pricing power. Yes, buying physical now requires paying a high premium, but I tell you, the $15 premium now is practically a gift compared to the $50 or even $100 premium that might appear a month from now. By then, even with money, you might not be able to knock open the doors of the vault. When you see the institutional forced liquidation causing paper prices to crash, do not be washed out. If the price drops from $71 to $60, it isn't T because silver has depreciated, it is because Morgan Stanley is closing the window. That is an artificially created liquidation. Let have a heart. 2. Heart. The reason Morgan Stanley chose the end of the month as the deadline is because that is the snapshot day for bank regulatory reports. They must have their books clean by then to ensure they show zero exposure. That way, when the too big to fail system truly cracks next month, they can gracefully sip their whiskey and say on television, "We were not involved." The coldest part of this world is that it never writes nonsense. It only writes repetitions. When the top players on Wall Street are all running for the exit, scrambling to leave this market, you had better run with them. The memo is real, the deadline is real, and the logic chain that is about to break is also real. The countdown has begun. You still have a few weeks. Please handle them with extreme caution. I want to ask you, in this global order built on debt, interest, and these fragile rules, Do you really think this kind of harvesting has vanished with the end of World War II? Or is it that every one of us is actually sitting at a settlement table, just waiting for it to be our turn to flip over that whole card? If, at this very moment, someone has also quietly and precisely drawn a red circle on your asset ledger, would you even be able to see it? Are you willing to admit that the wealth in your hands is actually just a beautiful dream lent to you by the powerful? Let's talk in the comments. After all, people who see through the truth are destined not to sleep too deeply amidst the New Year fireworks.